This is House Planning Help, episode 71. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-building or renovating. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. Alongside this, my personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. And coming up in this episode, my guest is Alastair Parvin. We're going to be finding out about WikiHouse. And we'll get stuck into that because quite often with these podcasts, I get to travel and see different buildings. That's the fun of it for me as well. And this was one that was a demo, really, a prototype, WikiHouse 4.0. So I thought, let's go and intercept Alastair in London. You may know about Alastair already because there was a great TED talk he did called Architecture for the People, by the People. And I thought that this could actually be a good introduction to him today if you haven't heard of him. Designer Alastair Parvin presents a simple but provocative idea. What if, instead of architects creating buildings for those who can afford to commission them, regular citizens could design and build their own houses? The concept is at the heart of WikiHouse, an open source construction kit that means just about anyone can build a house anywhere. There we go, that sets the scene. So I've gone up into London, I'm looking at the prototype. You can see how it's all been pieced together because it's been printed out on those 3D printers, the CNC cutters, and Alastair's going to explain a little bit more about that. What was quite amusing here, for me anyway, was there were some big media dogs in town. NBC, CNN, the BBC were all filming bits and pieces. And yet, for you, I managed to squeeze in a 20-minute interview. I'm very proud that I could get up to 20 minutes. I could see he was itching to get away onto the next one and going from place to place. But that was fantastic that we were able to have this chat. And it's a good chat, I believe. So I started by asking him just for a bit of a background about himself.
I trained in architecture, trained at University of Sheffield, and I think there was an interesting point when, we were working out, it was the peak of the boom times, and a lot of people were complaining, it's bad design, architecture is not what I thought, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people started to want to leave, and I was like, actually, this is fascinating because it means that the whole of economics behind cities and buildings doesn't work the way that we think it does. So I began researching that, the way that financial capital shapes our housing, and then beyond that, the nature of our housing crisis. And so for me, it came from two angles, which is one, it was research into why is it that a relatively prosperous nation has a housing crisis. Why are we building such poor quality small homes, second smallest homes in Europe, etc. And what's going wrong there? And then from the other side, just a curiosity about these new technologies, digital manufacturing and the web, and how they were and are going to completely reshape our civic framework, not always necessarily for the better. And it was a way that actually, we looked at the open source code movement and we saw in there, obviously, a technology that did have a very promising or very interesting civic framework behind it that was potentially going to outperform the existing model. And we realized pretty quickly that that was going to move from code into real things. So everything, all the disruptions that we've seen happen to media through YouTube, what YouTube's done for films, what Wikipedia's done for knowledge, is all coming into the world of physical things. And we realised actually you could do such mundane things as build houses with it.
I think before we go too far, you ought to explain to someone who doesn't know much about this, what is WikiHouse?
So WikiHouse is an open source construction system, which we're trying to develop. It's really trying to produce something at the intersection of digital manufacturing and open source sharing of design solutions on the web. So we're trying to make it possible to effectively share and download design solutions, 3D models and cutting files, which you can then effectively use to CNC cut to digitally manufacture the parts for a house. And the parts are all numbered and named, and you can then assemble, like a giant flat pack, a customized, high performance, hopefully relatively low cost house.
Obviously utilising the internet so it's accessible anywhere in the world. Who is this aimed at?
In a way, it's not a question of who it's aimed at. It's approaching from the other direction and saying that there are certain technologies that are potentially useful. And we know we all have certain common needs around housing, the technologies that go inside housing, and we know that those technologies are expanding. So it's not just going to be about the construction system, it's also going to be about the devices we put in our homes and the servicing inside our homes, etc. And realizing that if we could disrupt the way that those actually quite mundane technologies, we're very used to the idea of house, it's not a new technology, right? We could change the way that they're made and also who makes them. So in a way, I could say, oh, there are certain people right now who are picking up on WikiHouse, obviously self-builders and custom builders, et cetera, but I think the more long-term aim is to say, let's develop something very, very useful and then see who uses it.
I know you mentioned a little bit earlier on about how this is developing and it's coming about. So we've actually got the version 4 outside here in London, and I've had a look around. So maybe you could tell us the evolution of that house.
So, yeah, I mean, in a way, it probably should be 0.4. Or even 1, in the sense that all the many prototypes that have been done by us and others up to this point have been just testing and developing the system. I think this is the first system where for the first time I think we can say, look, we know we can make a house this way. So we're doing a 2-story house with a 4.8 metre room span, which we've developed through with Arabs engineers and also Momentum engineers and others. But embedded within this prototype right now is a load of work by a load of people that's been drawn in on, particularly the WikiHouse New Zealand team, who came up with a load of the innovations. So they took our system, they improved it, and we've readopted their improvements.
Open source is very much contributed by many. Is that how this works at the moment? There's no ownership over it or anything.
Well, there is. This is the thing, is that there is ownership over open source. It's about the license that it's shared under, and you have to be quite focused about what it is that's actually open source. It's not you can't get lost in bland rhetoric. What I mean by open source is that the intellectual property, in this case, the cutting files and the 3D models, which are detailed manufacturing information, are all shared under a CC license, which means anyone can access them for free and edit them and update them, etc. Anyone can do that, whether it's for profit or whatever it is. And the question is, who owns that knowledge? Well, that's a sort of knotty conversation, but that we're very interested in making sure that there's a good, robust, neutral governance system behind it. So we've established, we sort of just began experimenting with this project. We've now established an organisation called WikiHouse Foundation, which is a non-profit foundation, much like Wikimedia Foundation or Mozilla Foundation, which exists to be, if you like, the custodian of that knowledge, to say, actually, that knowledge will belong in commons in perpetuity, and then let the community, of which we are also a part, continue to develop it.
If I wanted to build a house this way, we know that affordability is one big driver of this, but am I able to? Who do I need to make this work?
Right now, the people adopting it, because it's been still early stages, are really, they're co-developers. They're designers who are really getting into the system and co-developing the system. I think if you're just an end user with no, you can do it, but you're really going to have to get into it and do your research. The truth is, as Linus Torvald said, the reality of doing an open source project is trying to get it out of your inbox. And a lot of it is still in our inbox. So we're working to try and get, and that's about building better web infrastructure and stuff to make up better sharing of the information that we do have. I think we're getting much closer to a point where actually just as an end consumer you can actually engage with the design files and stuff more quickly. And what also we'll begin to do is actually make available to say, look, here is, say, and the first ones we'll do this for is a sort of studio that you can build in your garden, but sub-consent under your general permitted developments. And we'll say, look, here's all the design files, so you can go away and make this for yourself if you want to, but if that's too difficult, also there's us and perhaps hopefully a whole range of other companies who will help you manufacture it, who will help you assemble it, etc., etc.
The cutters themselves, are we expecting more people to have ownership of this, or that there'll be one in your community?
Yeah, that's happening all the time already. I mean, there is a growing number of CNC workshops available. Actually, they're also all overstressed, so the price kind of fluctuates in the sense that they realise they can charge more. So in the net general, the price is coming down, but so often it will fluctuate. But equally, the performance of those machines and the ability to buy one is going up, so it's becoming more and more realistic to buy one. And actually, if you were doing more than one house, if you're doing a neighbourhood of houses, it would become totally economic to just start by buying the machine and manufacture them yourselves.
What makes these affordable?
The key element of that, the affordability these brings, is the ability to do work yourself, invest, what's called sweat equity. If you can make a system where it's hard to get wrong and quick enough that you can build it yourself, then it means that you no longer have to. There's parts of the work, probably not all the work, but many parts of the work which you can do yourself or with your friends. So that is one area of bringing it affordability. Another area of affordability is actually predictability, because actually in current custom build, you don't have to just be rich enough to afford it, but you have to be able to rich enough to afford it and the uncertainty of how much it might go over budget. So having products that get you closer and closer to being much more predictable that's a very helpful thing about affordability. And then I guess another thing, which is the same as all custom build, is which people don't realise, is simply by buying the house and the land separately, there's a whole load of things you're not paying, which are production profits, marketing stuff, etc., etc. And the OFT estimate that that's about a third of the price. So the same house, custom built, would be about 2/3 of the price of that house on the market.
Is it always going to be built from the same plywood? Is that's the system?
Yeah, now that's an awesome question, and I wish more people asked that more often, because a lot of people look at it and say, oh, it's about plywood. No, already it's about actually any structural sheet material. The principles and the ways of thinking and working of WikiHouse could apply to a huge number of potential technologies. I guess the common thread is digital manufacturing and open source. Now, there's many ways of 3D printing buildings that are emerging, going to be very, very interesting. Our current system works in some economic and climatic contexts, but it would be useless in others. So all we're doing is developing one system that works now, with the disruption we can make now, in the hope that that will grow and build, and we can begin to make other ones in the future, or more importantly, other ones do, because that's the heart of open source, is that people take something, they say, could be better, they fork it, they improve it, and that's what we're doing.
Energy efficiency, let's get technical here, because we've done a lot on things like passive house, so I know that air tightness is important. Are there any issues in terms of making this an airtight structure, windows? Oh, you tell me.
Well, the truth is, of course, we're still developing it, so we don't know. On paper, we can do some extraordinary things. So one thing we know we can do is it gives us these high energy performance walls. So we're talking about U values of 0.14, which is good enough. You could go up to passive house just about with that. So the areas of uncertainties we still haven't tested are things like leakage around windows and all that kind of thing. The thing that's in our favour in that is that with CNC production, you've got tiny tolerances. So this building out here, the difference between the length of the building in the model and the length of the building in the real life is 5 millimetres, which is pretty tiny. So it means that when you come to being able to control those tolerances, of course, you're actually onto a bit of a winner, because it actually makes it a heck of a lot easier to then airtight your building, and that's our aim, to be able to achieve very high outcomes. But I'm not going to claim that we can do it until we've proven it.
I visited the Facet homes, one of the ones that was on Grand Designs, and interestingly, chatting to the clients there, they thought that if they were to do it again, they'd factory build, having gone through all of this. So what are the benefits of really the portability?
I don't, you have to ask Facet what their view. I think Facet are doing more and more factory building anyway, just the economics. The truth of the WikiHouse is you can build it however you want. You can take a CNC machine on site. We quite like the idea of a house that has a CNC machine inside it and sort of builds itself. That might not happen for a while, but we'll see. Most of the ones we're doing are essentially they're made in a CNC workshop. Then we put all the parts into a van or a couple of vans, and we drive them to site. You've got the risk. The disadvantage of that is if you find you've got a piece missing. So you have to be quite disciplined or be able to respond to that. The advantage of doing it on site is, of course, you can respond to stuff like that. Obviously, the disadvantages of doing it on site are obvious in the sense of there's all the logistics of hooking up and all that kind of thing. So the truth is there'll be many different potential business models around how people find it's the most efficient way to do it. But the most useful thing, I think, about what we're trying to do is to say, actually, our parts are all carryable. That's quite useful, especially if people want to build them on rooftops or whatever, because you can actually just carry the parts up there. But again, it lowers the amount of kit that you need to build one of these things.
And how does it actually go together? Do you just have to be very careful as to the order that things are loaded and dropped off on site?
Yeah, the getting things in the right order is actually in some ways harder than building it, and we're trying to evolve this system, which has this Japanese design concept, yoke poke, which is basically foolproofing, making it impossible to get wrong. So we're trying to do that as far as possible. So you're really building by numbers. In this case, it was the middle of a city that we just did this one, and most of the problems we had were around the logistics rather than actually the thing itself. But yeah, one of the problems is, for example, you need space to lay out the parts, and it's very susceptible to rain. So actually, you need tarps or a gazebo or something like that, or whatever, to actually, it makes it much easier if you have something like that to lay out the parts so you can find the right numbered part as you build it. So there's a lot of those things about process which we we just develop, but our model is just iterate, and try not to make the same mistake twice.
Looking from a designer's perspective for a moment, obviously this is something that is accessible to anyone. So how are we getting a bespoke design, something that's interesting, something that's creative?
Well, imagine saying the twist on this is people think, oh, you're making it possible to not hire designers. But the irony is that the more you do that, the more people then want to hire you as a designer, because they can't afford to hire you for 6 months as a designer, but they can afford to hire you for a few weeks or a few days. So imagine someone coming to you and saying, actually, I want you to design me a house, but I want you to design me a house using this system, like it were Lego. And that way I know I can build it myself. And you will know that it's going to work because this has been tested by many, many people before. But they're still going to come to a designer to say, actually, I don't know how to design a house. I want you to respond to the needs of my family or, whatever. So actually, I think most users of WikiHouse system will be professionals. Small local companies, small designers, maybe big companies as well, manufacturers selling their services to custom builders.
Last couple of questions. We've got the house here in London. What were you aiming to do by having it on the show for people to have a little wander around?
Two things. Well, one is do our experiments in public, which is suicide, but we've always done it, and why not? So we are. This isn't. We haven't rigged this. Genuinely, we're doing our experiments in public. If it all goes wrong, it all goes wrong in public. We've been working on WikiHouse for a long time. We wanted to demonstrate that we were getting it across the reality line, that this wasn't a fiction, that some massive, industrial revolution that was going to happen in the future. This is something we could do right now. And also, partly, there's a broader context to this, which is we wanted to raise these debates, as we've been trying to do, to start these conversations and to challenge local authorities, developers, the government, to say, actually, if this is now possible, why is it still so hard to buy a plot of land, get planning permission? In other words, where's our right to build?
What are some of the key comments that you find people saying as they wander around, or questions they ask?
Why has it got no roof on it is the main one at the moment.
Why has it got no roof on it?
Basically because the construction sequence is that you build the first story, which has handrails in, so that you can build the second roof that creates a safe working platform to build the second roof. So essentially we've tried to design out scaffolding frameworks, which is a big win. Unfortunately, the constraints of this site and this project meant we didn't have the resources or the time to do that complete house. So what you're seeing here is, if you like, a half-finished 2-story house to test that process. We didn't want to... we want to make one jump at a time. So that's why this house looks like a box rather than looking like a house shape. That's been one of the questions that's come up. The other ones are how much it's going to cost. Is it available now? A lot of people they're like, is it available now? And we're like, oh man, we really have to get organised.
They think it's a show home, don't they? That you're trying to sell them something.
Because we're so used to the idea if someone's doing something like this, they're being sold something. And we're saying, no, we're developing this. If you're a pioneering client and you want to commission us now, you can, and there's some people are, but in terms of absolute readiness, we're getting there, but we're not being salesmen here. We genuinely are trying to do an awesome thing and then find somewhere down the line a way to earn a living, and for others to earn a living using it.
That's a good point. And how do you learn from this specific house? You mentioned that it's an experiment.
The lessons are endless and myriad, and what we'll be doing is getting all our volunteers together at some point and having basically a big debrief where we'll get a big shared Google Doc, and we'll put all the notes, everything through every stage of the process, every little glitch, everything that needs to be improved, everything that went wrong, in a very soul-destroying but useful document.
And one final question. I know you're a busy man. What is the future of all of this, and how quickly can it happen?
Well, as I said, there is no destination. There's only a direction of travel, and we'll just go as far as we can, as fast as we can. I think, obviously, our hope now is that there'll be much greater adoption. There'll be the ability to earn a living by selling and using WikiHouse, which will, of course, accelerate things tremendously. We can build better web infrastructure, and hopefully from the back of that, WikiHouse Foundation as well can do a better job of supporting that. We will begin to see not just WikiHouses popping up in the UK and around the world, but also the beginnings of emerging new technologies. So in this prototype already we're seeing some amazing stuff that Arabs have done. We've got an open source heat recovery ventilator. We've got these open source house control systems. The Internet of Things, all these devices are going to transform our lives, but at the moment most of the options are running off platforms where our data is owned by a company some thousands of miles away. So the ability to open up, literally create an open space for these services, these plug-and-play services and devices. And I think we'll start to see a much greater diversity of the technologies involved in WikiHouse, and maybe even beginning, I think this might be a while yet, to expand into other construction methodologies, but based on the same principles, and as we've said, hopefully also beginning to develop neighbourhood development models that address the problem, not making things easier, not just at the scale of the house, but at the scale of a whole neighbourhood.
Alastair, thank you very much.
Cool, thanks very much.
If you want to review the session at all, we keep show notes online, just the key points from each session today. Those show notes are at houseplanninghelp.com/71. We've got links to WikiHouse, to Alastair on Twitter, pictures that I took on my visit up there as I wandered around, so you can take a look at those, and a link to the TED Talk that we mentioned right at the beginning of this podcast. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/71. One final piece of business, I'd love you to write an iTunes review of this podcast. And here are a few reasons why. Firstly, it raises the visibility of the podcast in the iTunes store. They think, hey, what's going on here? It's got a few positive reviews. Let's bump it up in the store. It also helps others get a sense of the podcast before they download and perhaps encourages them. And it's a good source of feedback to me and what we do in future episodes. So if you want to use it as a way to feedback, then absolutely great. And from time to time, we will read out some of those reviews as well. So there we go. We're all done for today. Thank you very much for listening. Catch up next time. Cheers.